Thank you so much, Marcus. It's time now for ThorZaIN to enter his isolation booth and play against one of his big rivals and teammate mousesports MorroW.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if, well, number one, MorroW's going to have to stick to a certain type of play, right? MorroW can be relatively aggressive, so he's going to have to stick to his layer tech. We're not going to see him rushing up to Hive to do anything that's going to throw off ThorZaIN, and I'm so excited to see ThorZaIN really try to break out of his shell and make this happen.
And, you know, that phrase really sticks with me when he says, I know how to get the right army. I know how to get a good army, but I don't know what to do with it. And it's one of those funny struggles where it's often just so powerful just to have a ton of stuff that you can win and win and win and win and win.
And that's worked for him.
Yeah, until players catch up to your level.
Yeah. And so that's very much what we've seen happen with ThorZaIN, right? He came out of the gates as an extremely strong player, maintained that momentum for a very long amount of time, and then players started figuring out ways how to crack that, right? Consistently breaking the Terran and just making him, even as we've heard ThorZaIN say time and time again, he's afraid to leave his base. And that's a bad place to be in. That's a really uncomfortable place to be in as a pro player.
And now he's going to be up against the really nice Ling-Baneling control of MorroW. He's really good at spreading his creep, at having his Mutalisk in the right place at the right time, having those Lings and Banelings always ready to do a huge flank. So it's going to be a big test for ThorZaIN. And again, MorroW, like you said, has been instructed, don't six pool. That would defeat the purpose of the whole challenge. It looks like game number 1 has been started, and it's time for ThorZaIN to begin his challenge. Down in the bottom right, it looks like we have from Team mousesports, it's MorroW.
And all the way across the map, the focus player for the next few matches, we've got ThorZaIN, also hailing from mousesports.
It looks like ThorZaIN giving the good luck, have fun, Mr. Anderson, and that is not a typo. There are actually 2 S's in that last name.
Oh.
And MorroW just calling him Eklöf. Bam, just like saying it right out the gate. Now, in terms of openings and the way that the game is going to begin, I would not anticipate that there's going to be too much variety at the start. I mean, maybe ThorZaIN will go drop sometimes. Maybe MorroW will go for roaches sometimes. The important thing, though, is that mid-game period.
So it's really going to be all about just making sure that you get to that mid-game point safely, and then it's going to be all about setting up his execution at that point. Because he's in a place where he needs lots of knowledge to execute this very well, right? He's not only in the dark in his own ability, but when you try to do this, you're in the dark anyway when you start, right? You have no information, so it's all about getting that information quickly and reacting to it.
Looks like we do see a barracks going down. It's tucked away by the main. ThorZaIN's known for this hyper-defensive placement. And the funny thing to note is that even though we know no 6 pools are coming, this is still a very nice way to defend against it. If you see the 6 pool coming, you can just supply depot, wall in, neglect building that orbital command, and just stay very, very, very tightly concealed inside. And it looks like the refinery now going down from ThorZaIN. I would pretty much anticipate we're going to see reactor Hellions.
Sure, which would make sense. It'll guarantee that he's going to get into that mid-game. And like you said, even though that these are practice games, even though that he knows that his opponent isn't going to be 6-pooling, it's still good to be in those habits, right? To be ready for any sort of attack that can come. So it's nice to see that ThorZaIN isn't just taking his opponent in this training session for completely granted and altering his play specifically just for these games.
Now, one thing I'd like to note about both these players, they're very capable of doing mass gaming. I mean, even in the interview, you heard that ThorZaIN is more than comfortable playing for up to 4 or 5 hours on an empty map with no opponents, just rehearsing a build, let alone, you know, considering the amount of mass gaming he's done against the dynamic play of human components. MorroW, of course, has been in Korea for a long time, very comfortable with the sort of training regimens they impose there. And it looks like ThorZaIN going for a 1 Rax command center with a delayed gas. If you take the gas at 15, you'll have just enough to get that factory up and still squeeze in this early command center.
Perfect, which is going to likely turn into exactly what you expected with those reactor Hellions potentially after he gets that extra base established. And now down here, we haven't seen ThorZaIN worry at all about getting any sort of vision across that map. And there we have the factory going down as well, and most certainly the reactor to follow on that Rax, followed by the liftoff.
Yep, there it goes. Looks like reactor Thrudge gets planted down. You know, in ThorZaIN, in a lot of his previous tournaments, we've seen that he has this kind of ultra, extremely patient, slow style that often gives him a win. Yeah. Very, very often gives him a solid win. But what we haven't talked about is the way he looks when he loses, where a single move out causes him the whole game. We've seen so many tournaments where we see him walk out and a couple of Banelings hit 14 of his Marines, and boom, he can't put on any more pressure. Or drop dies. That has happened so many times at countless events.
Right, and really, if you're able to stop ThorZaIN for a long enough amount of time, he just doesn't have enough tools in the box anymore, right? So that's what he's trying to do here. He's trying to add tools to his arsenal so that he can get out of those situations and really play the game and force his opponent to play how he wants them to.
It almost reminds me of when we were watching Sase play against Chef. That it's almost like, what are my comeback tools?
Yes.
If I feel like I'm behind, what do I do to come back into the game? We saw Sase at a lot of disadvantages. Boom, he does an immortal drop with Zealots and is doing huge damage. Great way for him to start stepping back into the game. ThorZaIN is looking for those ways to chip himself forward. It looks like we have 2 Hellions coming out down the center of the map. Another 2 will be joining him shortly. And it looks like he will likely end up doing the swap on the factory with the Tech Lab to make sure that he can both get Stim and those tanks started early.
And now we've got a little bit of aggression out of that ramp, but that's obviously going to be thwarted by those 2 Queens and the Spine Crawler at the ramp, also throwing down that Roach Warren to finish off a pretty nice wall, meaning that we're not going to see a lot of Hellions push in.
We do see it looks like the Roach Warren is getting planted down at the front. Nice creep spread. Queens, very low energy from MorroW. Just now really starting to accumulate more geysers. I really don't think he's going to be building too many roaches. It's one of those emergency backup procedures. I mean, both players have a sense of what the other one is doing, but it's still important not to just overcommit and overassume. Right now we see ThorZaIN doing the usual ultra passive play with those Hellions. He's going to just sit.
Well, I mean, he has no choice at this point because he's not going to be able to get up and really get anything done there. We do see MorroW now having just started his lair as he moves into that mid-game, and ThorZaIN, meanwhile, has also begun his siege tank tech as well as Stim, and he's beginning to start that wall at his natural.
Yeah, I love this about ThorZaIN. Literally every trick in the book to help give you a little extra edge at the start, he does that. Trying to just sneak in the command center before he gets his factory up with that 15 gas timing, walling off his front with his supply depots, but he's not even doing it just arbitrarily. He's waiting until he needs a depot, and then he's setting it up there. MorroW also being quite clever with his Roach pushes at the front, trying to send the Hellions back, but it looks like ThorZaIN's control is a little bit too good for that, and he successfully kills 2 Roaches.
Yeah, so that was actually pretty nice for ThorZaIN. Any free kills that you can get with those Hellions after your opponent already has a wall is pretty much just money in the bank for you.
Oh, yeah.
And now we've got MorroW, man, like you said, he is so good at that creep spread, getting out there, landing all of those tumors, and now ThorZaIN's actually not going to be worried too much about a push, but man, MorroW is on fire with that creep
He has
spread.
so many creep tumors. Oh my gosh. This looks like my acne in high school. This is incredible. Looks like ThorZaIN is now continuing to try to just macro up. And I like that little juke forward that he did with the pullback, but his goal is not to win with early game pushes. He's probably going to wait till, I'd say, around 10, 11, 12 minutes to really start considering those lightning pushes.
Right, because he wants to make sure, like, he doesn't just want to win a game at 9 minutes, right? Like, that's not the focus of this training. He's trying to break out of his shell and add additional weapons to whatever he can do. So now we also have ThorZaIN moving out, taking that third. A little bit of a skirmish out in the middle. Those Zerglings are surrounding a lot of the Hellions. It's looking like ThorZaIN is going to pretty much lose all of that center map control that he had. Now he's starting to move out his army to try to get over there and clean up the rest of that, and he most certainly will, but he has lost the most mobile part of his army.
Yeah, that's always a real danger. He's actually just sprinting up here to ensure that he can continue to maintain the center watchtower with his only remaining Hellions. Zerglings are going to try to sneak by, and MorroW, I mean, even though he knows that ThorZaIN is going to be going for macro mode, still just double checking, still having overlords well positioned, still doing these little tiny small counter attacks.
Oh man, and as we see, MorroW is still staying on top of that creep spread. This is actually the first time that I've seen literally a wall of creep be pushed out from the base.
Oh, this is just beautiful. Oh, isn't she a beauty?
Oh yes.
Just spreading.
I reckon.
And, you know, I want to talk a little bit about the practice psychology while we've hit in this period of time where we see that MorroW is indeed establishing 1-1 upgrades, his Spire tech, his Baneling Nest. It's so easy to get used to that ladder mentality where you're thinking, how do I win? Where does win live? Okay, this game, I don't think he'll expect Void Rays. I'll do that. Ha, I won. Next game I encounter him, I'm going to go Dark Templar and try to surprise him. And then after that, I'm going to do a one-base Colossus all in, and that'll really throw him off.
And then after that, you don't have a practice partner anymore.
Well, I mean, this is the way that sort of random gaming works against a general opponent, but in this situation, these players know exactly what the other one is going to do. Exactly. Where does your edge come from? That's what ThorZaIN's really trying trying to explore. And look at MorroW. This is going to be an excellent setup for ThorZaIN to try to do these ultra-fast drops plus pushes.
Now, this could be something that could perhaps even nullify ThorZaIN's ability to drop in a lot of places, because MorroW has so much map vision. So even when ThorZaIN believes that he's controlling the location of MorroW's army, it's possible that MorroW is able to just react prior to really needing to do anything, because he's going to be able to see everything moving on the map.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly, incredibly difficult for ThorZaIN in this period to really know where he should be able to move. But it's a time like this right now. The Noodles are moving up to the north of the map. This is where a drop to the south side will catch a lot of units out of position. I mean, obviously this counterattack is good to defend against this, but this is exactly where ThorZaIN needs to drop and hit the south side. He has some units here. We're still seeing him sort of want to recoil back into that defensive procedure. Right now, if he conquered the center, he could easily begin dropping and cutting these armies in half, but he may very well be waiting until he has 2-2. Oh, yeah. There it is.
And he's starting to load up and possibly try to move that medevac around the far edge of the map. And now ThorZaIN really doesn't have a lot of information about what's going on in the center. He still doesn't really know where that army is, and that is so crucial to what he's going to be able to do with these drops.
You know, we see still being really, really gentle, really passive. That first medevac tried to go on a drop and is literally unloading. This is the exact position that ThorZaIN has been trying to avoid so many times. He really needs to send a scan. He has sacrificed so many Marines up in that high ground region. He needs to just shove and go. He's overly concerned, or he needs to throw down a scan.
Right, we haven't really seen him use those scans offensively. He's pretty much just been trying to use his entire army to get knowledge rather than using his orbital commands to get that knowledge instead.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there looks like a drop is finally starting to come. And look at this. MorroW is being caught in this center battle. He's really forced to be all the way down here. There's the scan to kill off creep tumors, but it's still not one of those, where is my opponent's army scan? This drop is going to encounter a lot of trouble if there's not extra pressure being applied by ThorZaIN. He needs to scan and go. I'm regularly checking. There it is. Always want to check the ThorZaIN cam, see exactly where he's starting to step forward. There's the mutas. The bottom side is completely vulnerable to drops. I'm shocked that this medevac is over here in the danger zone.
Right, and it seems like ThorZaIN's almost falling into his old habits, right? He's got that army out in the center of the map. He's in a situation where he's using a small amount of units at a time to just try to beat off or stop MorroW's forces from getting in there and beat them backwards. And there he goes, moving in with a lot of the Marines. Oh, man, it's looking like he's going to be able to clean up the army, but he still hasn't made the drop happen.
Oh, this would have been the key period of time. We see ThorZaIN doing a great job with the 3-3 upgrades, trying to get those up quickly, but again, feeling a little bit distracted. And I mean, even MorroW was joking with his teammate ThorZaIN, you never end up dropping, man. I always know. But look at that. The drop happens, and what occurs? Suddenly, ThorZaIN is able to step forward into the middle of the map. He didn't need to kill that much with the drop. He needed to have the Mutalisks in the wrong position.
Oh, man. And so it's actually looking like ThorZaIN has taken control of the map, but it hasn't exactly been the way that he really wanted to moving into this practice match. Now, MorroW is getting over here. He's probably going to be able to clean up, landing a couple of those banelings very nicely, and now MorroW has taken the supply lead.
It looks like MorroW is trading leads, and finally MorroW manages to clean up some of that in the center. But great job, ThorZaIN really starting to step into what he wanted to do.
Right, and he is taking advantage of that situation. When he knows that MorroW is fighting his force in the center of the map, that is the time that you can drop down at a base. And now he's focus firing down that hatchery. He doesn't quite finish it off, but he was still able to completely stop mining at that base and force MorroW into a defensive position. And now getting every mile that he can out of those Marines and moving them into main.
And what's the one thing that MorroW has to defend? Zerglings. All the Zerglings have to pull back. So what happens? ThorZaIN steps into mid quite comfortably, quite easily. And ThorZaIN hasn't really done this style that much. He didn't have the time to really put in training it for other tournaments. Now getting the chance to do that.
And moving between that fourth base and the main just takes such a long amount of time with that ground army, because you have to move around so much of the map. And now I really want to see ThorZaIN continuing to do those drops, because now that MorroW doesn't have an incredibly high Mutalisk count available to be entirely mobile, he can really abuse him.
Yeah, and MorroW honestly would have tech to Hive right now, but he was instructed stay at layer tech. He's trying to step up, pick off these tanks and this sort of thing. To note, expansion-wise, MorroW has all the bases in the bottom right. His expansions are literally as packed together as they can possibly be. Yet still, just by controlling the center, we see that ThorZaIN is in a really good position to be aggressive. But look, the instant the aggression lets up from ThorZaIN, MorroW seizes the opportunity and performs a counterattack.
And that's what makes this so important for ThorZaIN. He needs to keep on that aggression, not only only is it going to do damage to MorroW, but it just stops MorroW from being able to push on him. So as soon as those drops stopped, as soon as the push stopped, and as soon as MorroW was able to take control of the center of the map, but ThorZaIN is still doing what he wanted. He's moving those Marines around the bottom, taking out that fourth base, and dropping in the third at the same time.
Oh, but MorroW manages to clean it up, and MorroW is so good, being able to withstand all the pressure from these various drops while still managing to deal a blow back to ThorZaIN. ThorZaIN does manage to establish control of that once upon a time gold expansion in the center of the map, and now MorroW still has to have an answer to what's going on in the center.
So it was really just one of those situations where MorroW just had a lot of stuff, right? MorroW didn't necessarily have a huge amount of map control. He just had enough things that he could split his army into two and stop both of those pushes while attacking ThorZaIN. I think that if ThorZaIN had done that aggression just a little bit sooner, he would absolutely be in a better spot.
And now it looks like MorroW just stepping forward, trying to target fire this command center. It forces these SCVs to be a little bit out of position, make themselves a little bit more vulnerable voluntarily. And I honestly have to give MorroW so much credit for being so solid in this matchup. You know, he does train out in Korea, and I've heard that almost all the players in OGS have losing records against him. All the Terrans there, just again and again and again, with his layer style, with this extreme aggression, the 1-0 upgrades, the 2-2 Zerglings doing huge pain in mid.
And now moving in those Mutalisks and picking off a couple of those tanks, and it's looking like he may even have enough Mutalisks to finish off the rest of the Marines. He's trying to bring in some Lings as well, but the tanks stopping that aggression, forcing MorroW to pull back. Now this is right where ThorZaIN wants to be. If he continues with those drops, he can totally swing this game.
Yeah, I'm curious if MorroW is being a little bit too deliberate with delaying of his infestation pit. I mean, I know that we instructed him to, and that we discussed it before the game, but he is continuing to do damage with his layer tech, but there's every reason he should be beginning to tech towards that hive.
And here we have MorroW moving into the main with that mass amount of Mutalisks, just doing what he can. And now it's looking like ThorZaIN is going to be back in his comfort zone, having his army out in the center of the map, also being able to drop down on the fourth, forcing MorroW to burrow all of his drones, and MorroW just doesn't have enough Zerglings to be in multiple places at once, and there goes the hatch.
Hatch falls down in the main, another medevac drop. ThorZaIN in 1,000,001 places, and there's the good game.
Well, so I think that was very much an example of ThorZaIN saying what he wanted to do and doing it.
And I almost disagree with some of my previous statements at the start of the game. You know, it's so easy to say, oh, look at ThorZaIN, he's being so passive. I guess I would say from around 11 to 13 minutes.
Yes.
He was stepping into the middle of the map. Oh, he's being a little passive. It's kind of interesting to see that mix of ThorZaIN's slow, methodical, let's wait for it, let's wait for it. And then when he wanted to do the aggression, just exploded right into action.
Right. I do think that there was probably a significant window of time where he didn't need to continue slow pushing into the center before he could have dropped. Like, if you're able to get those drops around into your opponent's base, you very much are able to just secure the center of the map through aggression, right? Because you're going to force MorroW to pull out of the center of the map anyway. You don't need to worry about pushing your units up there.
You know, it's interesting because what essentially you're saying is that there's a two-step process to these pushes.
Sure.
You don't, or one of the places you want to be is getting to the front of his base and doing damage. The second, and probably more important one, is that you want to get the center.
Yes.
The first drops allow him to establish control of that center. And then once he has the center, dropping both sides becomes a much bigger threat for the Zerg player.
Totally. And I think ThorZaIN's totally going to see that window, right? He's going to review this replay, hopefully, and maybe he'll be able to get that knowledge. I think that he feels comfortable after that first game, though, right? He was able to mix in the goal that he wanted to do. Not quite as much as he could have, but I think that as he continues to refine that, we're going to see that just become better and better.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those fine lines where there's players who go a little bit nuts when they're like, I'm going to drop, and then literally no Marines ever spend time on the ground. They're just floating around to their death for the majority of the game. So I like that ThorZaIN is doing kind of a mix of it, but I still think that, you know, you want to test the limits.
Yes.
It's not so much a question of should he be dropping more, should he be dropping less. In practice, he wants to drop as much as he can and then keep backing off, and then saying, oh, here's where it's good.
This is the sweet spot. Yes.
Okay, now let me try to be really passive and then maybe do one drop, and then two, and then three. And okay, now I have this range of success where I know about what ends up working.
Well, and you'll also end up in situations, if you do it that way, that you'll know how to react to failed drops, right? Because if you're only waiting until it's completely safe for you to drop, you won't know how close you can get to that edge.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think, one of the biggest dangers is when people do one of two things. They either Well, okay, let me try it again. There's really one of two things that I think are the big keys to adjustment. One is big, large change, going for a drastic drastic departure from your usual style. The other one is to do little tiny adjustments, not too big. I feel like often people will say, well, let me build an Immortal. Oh, it didn't work. Okay, now I'm going to try to build a Colossus.
Right,
Oh,
and that's like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah,
that's not. You haven't fully explored that option quite yet. So I want to see ThorZaIN. Just like you said that he really didn't push out very much until after the 13-minute mark, right? And before the game, we were expecting that we'd probably see drops being effective closer to like the 10:30, 11, 12-minute mark. And I think that as long as ThorZaIN breaks out of that need to try to push up the center of the map with his army and instead use drops to force MorroW into doing things that he doesn't want to do, he can push this to the limit.